The wind screamed in Martha's ears as she fell through empty air. 90 feet below, sharp rocks waited like hungry teeth. Her husband George tumbled beside her, his hand reaching desperately for hers. This can't be happening, she thought. Our own son just pushed us off a cliff. But let me tell you how we got here. Because this story, it will shock you to your very core. If you're ready to hear the truth about what families can hide, please like this story, share it with someone who needs to know, and subscribe because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see the people closest to you forever. My name is Martha, and until today, I believed I had the most wonderful family in the world. For 40 years, I was married to George, the kindest man you could ever meet. George worked hard every day fixing cars at his garage. His hands were always dirty with engine oil, but his heart was pure gold. Every evening, he'd come home and kiss my forehead, asking about my day like it was the most important thing in the world. We had 2 sons, Robert and Derek. Robert was our miracle, born with a smile that could light up the darkest room. Even as a little boy, he protected everyone around him. When Derek cried as a baby, Robert would sing to him. When I was sick, 8-year-old Robert would bring me soup and sit by my bed reading stories. "Mama," he used to say, "I'll always take care of our family." Derek was different, quieter. He watched everything with dark, serious eyes. While Robert played with friends, Derek stayed in his room, planning and thinking. George called him our little businessman because Derek always seemed to be calculating something. Nothing wrong with ambition, George would tell me when I worried. Derek's just focused on his future. I wish we had paid more attention to what kind of future Derek was planning. Everything changed the day Robert died. It was supposed to be a simple hiking trip. Robert, now 28 and married to his college sweetheart, wanted to show his new wife the beautiful mountains where we used to camp as a family. Derek went with them, saying he needed fresh air to clear his head. Only Derek came back. It happened so fast, Derek told the police, tears streaming down his face. Robert slipped on loose rocks near the cliff edge. I tried to grab him, but I wasn't fast enough. The police ruled it an accident. The funeral was the saddest day of our lives. I held George's hand as we buried our firstborn son, the one who promised to always protect our family. Derek seemed broken by grief. He barely spoke for months. When he finally did start talking again, he was different. Colder somehow. The warm little boy who used to need his big brother's protection had turned into a stranger. Grief changes people, our pastor told us. Give him time. We gave him 3 years. 3 years of watching our surviving son become someone we didn't recognize. Then Derek met Sandra. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, like a knife wrapped in silk. Her smile never reached her eyes, and when she looked at George and me, I felt like she was measuring us for something. "She's just nervous about meeting Derek's parents," George said after their first visit. "She'll warm up to us." But Sandra never warmed up. Instead, she seemed to make Derek even colder. During family dinners, they would whisper to each other and stop talking when we walked into the room. They asked strange questions about our house, our savings, our plans for retirement. "Are you sure you want to stay in this big house?" Sandra would say, looking around our home like it was already hers. "It's so much work for people your age." "Maybe it's time to think about the future," Derek would add, staring at us with those calculating eyes. The future. He said that word like it tasted good in his mouth. The money questions. 6 months after Derek and Sandra got married, the money question started. "Mom, Dad," Derek said during Sunday dinner, "Sandra and I have been talking. We're worried about your financial security." Financial security? George had worked for 40 years. We owned our house. We had savings. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. "We're fine, son," George replied, confused. "Are you, though?" Sandra jumped in, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "What happens if one of you gets sick? What if you need expensive care? Wouldn't it be smart to plan ahead?" Derek nodded seriously. "We think you should update your will. Make sure everything is organized." The way he said organized made my skin crawl. "Our will is fine," I said firmly. We left everything split between you and Robert's widow, just like we always planned. Derek's face got very still, very quiet. But Robert is gone, Mom. His widow remarried and moved away. She doesn't need our family money. Shouldn't everything come to the son who's still here? The son who survived. That word, survived, hung in the air like a threat. George and I looked at each other across the table. For the first time in 40 years of marriage, I saw fear in my husband's eyes. The pressure builds. Over the next few months, Derek and Sandra visited us more often. But these weren't loving family visits. Every conversation came back to the same thing. Our will, our money, our house. You're not getting any younger, Sandra would say, touching my arm with fake concern. Accidents happen all the time. Accidents. Like what happened to Robert. Derek started bringing papers for us to sign. Legal documents about transferring property, changing beneficiaries, giving him power of attorney over our finances. It's just paperwork, Mom, he'd say when I hesitated. Family taking care of family.
But George noticed something.
Money was disappearing from our savings account. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. When he went to the bank, they told him the withdrawals were made with his signature. Except George never signed anything. Someone's been forging our signatures, George whispered to me one night. I think Derek has been stealing from us for months. My blood ran cold. Our own son, stealing from his parents like a common thief. But if Derek would steal from us, what else would he do? Last week, Derek called with an invitation. Mom, Dad, Sandra, and I want to take you on a special family trip. Just the four of us. Remember that beautiful mountain trail where we used to hike when Robert and I were kids? The same mountains where Robert died. We thought it would be nice to reconnect as a family, Sandra added when Derek put the call on speaker. Talk about the future. Make some important decisions together. George tried to say no, but Derek insisted. Please, Dad. After everything that's happened, after losing Robert, I need my family close to me. He knew exactly what to say, how to make us feel guilty, how to make us think he still loved us. So we said yes. This morning, we drove to the mountains with Derek and Sandra. They were unusually happy, laughing and joking like they were celebrating something. Now I know what they were celebrating. They were celebrating our deaths. The mountain air was crisp as we started walking up the trail. Derek carried a heavy backpack, and Sandra had a strange smile on her face. She kept checking her phone, like she was waiting for something important. Beautiful day for a hike, Derek said, but his voice sounded empty, like he was reading words from a script. George walked beside me, his hand finding mine. I could feel him trembling, not from the cold mountain air, but from fear. The same fear that was growing in my chest like a dark flower. Something was terribly wrong. As we climbed higher, Derek started talking about Robert. But not the way people usually talk about someone they love and miss. He talked about Robert like Robert had been a problem that got solved. Robert always thought he was so perfect, Derek said, kicking a rock off the path. Always Mom and Dad's favorite. Always the hero of the family. Derek, I said softly, Robert loved you. He protected you when you were little. Derek laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was cold and bitter. Protected me? Robert controlled everything. He got all the attention, all the praise. Even after he died, you still talk about him like he was some kind of saint. Sandra nodded along with every word. Derek told me how Robert used to boss him around. How Robert made him feel small and worthless. That wasn't true. Robert had been nothing but kind to his little brother. But I could see that Derek believed his own lies. Or maybe he just needed to believe them to feel better about what he'd done. George stopped walking. What did you say? I said Robert made Derek feel small, Sandra repeated, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. No, George said, his voice getting stronger. You said what he'd done. Like Robert did something wrong. But Robert never hurt anyone. Robert was good and kind, and Robert was a fool, Derek snapped, all pretense of sadness gone from his voice. And now he's dead. which means I'm the only son left, which means everything should come to me. The way he said it made my blood freeze. There was no grief in his voice. No love. Just cold calculation and something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. That's when I knew. Deep in my heart, I knew the truth I'd been trying not to see for 3 years. Derek had killed his brother. We kept walking because we didn't know what else to do. The trail got steeper and more dangerous. On one side was the mountain wall. On the other side was a drop, so deep you couldn't see the bottom. Derek kept talking, and with every word, more of his mask slipped away. "You know what's funny?" he said, not looking at us. "After Robert died, I thought everything would be different. I thought you'd finally see me, pay attention to me. But you just kept talking about perfect Robert and how much you missed him." "We grieved for our son," George said quietly. "Both our sons were important to us." "Both." Derek laughed again.
No, Dad.
"You made it very clear who mattered more. Robert got the college money. Robert got the car. Robert got your respect and love. What did I get?" "You got love too," I whispered, but even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Had we loved Derek less? Had we somehow created the monster walking in front of us? "I got scraps," Derek said, his voice rising. "Robert's leftovers. Even now, you leave half your money to his widow. A woman who's not even part of our family anymore." Sandra pulled out her phone again and showed Derek the screen. He nodded like they were following some kind of plan. "That's going to change today," Sandra said sweetly. "Today, everything changes." The way she said it made my skin crawl. What did she mean? What was supposed to change today? George must have been thinking the same thing because he grabbed my arm and pulled me closer to him. "Derek," George said carefully, "what's this really about? Why did you bring us up here?" Derek stopped walking and turned to face us. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I remembered. The quiet child who used to watch his big brother with such admiration. But then his face changed, and I saw something that made me want to run. Pure hatred. "This is about justice, Dad. This is about getting what I deserve. What I've always deserved. Son, we've given you everything we could." "Everything." Derek's voice cracked like a whip. "You gave Robert everything. The business loan when he wanted to start his company. The down payment for his house. The wedding money. What did you give me?" "We offered to help with your wedding," I said desperately. "We offered to help you buy a house. You said you didn't need our money." "I said that because Robert told me to." Derek screamed, and suddenly, he wasn't a grown man anymore. He was a furious, jealous child. He said the family money should go to the responsible son. He said I needed to prove myself first. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Robert hadn't been trying to hurt Derek. He'd been trying to teach him responsibility, trying to help him grow up. But Derek had twisted that guidance into something cruel and unfair. "So you killed him," George said quietly. The words hung in the mountain air like smoke. Derek went very still. Sandra stepped closer to him, her hand moving toward the backpack. "That's a terrible thing to say about your own son," Derek said softly. But he didn't deny it. "You pushed him off the cliff," George continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Your own brother. The brother who loved you and protected you his whole life. You murdered him because you were jealous." Derek's face twisted into something ugly. "I didn't murder anyone. I just stopped trying to save him." My knees almost gave out. The image formed in my mind like a horrible movie. Robert slipping on loose rocks, reaching for help, calling his brother's name. And Derek just standing there, watching, letting it happen, maybe even making sure it happened. "You're sick," I whispered. "You need help." "The only thing I need," Derek said, unzipping the backpack, "is for you to sign these papers." He pulled out a folder full of legal documents. The same papers he'd been trying to get us to sign for months. Transfer of property, new will, power of attorney. Everything that would make Derek and Sandra the owners of our entire life. "We're not signing anything," George said firmly. Derek reached into the backpack again. This time he pulled out something that made my heart stop. A gun. "Yes," he said calmly, pointing it at George's chest. You are. Sandra clapped her hands together like a child watching a magic show. Finally, I was getting so tired of pretending to be nice to you too. The mask was completely off now. These weren't our son and daughter-in-law. These were strangers. Dangerous strangers who had been planning this moment for months, maybe years. Derek, I pleaded, please don't do this. We're your parents. We love you. Love.
Derek laughed.
You loved Robert.
You tolerated me. But that's okay, Mom.
After today, you won't have to tolerate me anymore. The trail had led us to a wide clearing near the edge of the cliff. The same cliff where Robert had died. I realized this wasn't a coincidence. Derek had brought us to the exact spot where he'd killed his brother. He planned to kill us in the same place. Sign the papers, Derek said, waving the gun toward a flat rock where Sandra was spreading out the documents. Make it legal. Leave everything to your loving son, who survived. George and I looked at each other. We could sign the papers and hope Derek would let us live. Or we could refuse and die right here, right now. But deep down, I knew the truth. Derek wasn't going to let us leave this mountain alive. We knew too much now. We'd figured out what really happened to Robert. Dead people can't tell secrets. If we sign, George said slowly, will you let us go home? Derek smiled, and it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. Oh, Dad. You are going home. Just not the home you think. Sandra giggled, like this was all a game. Derek's been planning this for such a long time. Ever since Robert's accident gave him such a good idea. An idea. That's all we were to them. An idea for how to get rich quick. The gun never wavered as Derek forced us toward the papers.
Sign them, Mom.
Dad, make this easy on yourselves. I picked up the pen with shaking hands. Behind Derek and Sandra, the sun was starting to set.
Soon it would be dark. Soon no one would see what happened on this mountain.
But as I touched the pen to paper, George grabbed my wrist. Martha, he whispered so quietly only I could hear. Remember what you used to tell the boys when they had nightmares? I looked into my husband's eyes and understood. When Robert and Derek were small and scared of monsters in the dark, I used to tell them, sometimes you have to be braver than you feel. Sometimes you have to fight even when you're afraid. I remember, I whispered back. George squeezed my hand 3 times. Our secret signal from 40 years of marriage. It meant, I love you and be ready and trust me.
Now,
George shouted. Everything happened at once. George lunged toward Derek, trying to grab the gun. I threw the papers into the wind, watching our death warrants blow away over the cliff edge. Sandra screamed and rushed toward me. Derek and George struggled for the weapon. The gun went off with a sound like thunder, and I thought my heart would stop. But both men were still standing. You crazy old fool, Derek yelled, hitting George in the face with the gun handle. You just made this so much harder than it needed to be. George stumbled backward, blood running from his nose. But he was alive. He was fighting. He was being brave, even though he was afraid. Just like he'd taught our boys to be brave. Just like Robert had been brave his whole life. Just like we were going to be brave right now, even if it killed us. Because I suddenly understood something Derek would never understand. Love makes you strong. Real love. Not the jealous, selfish thing Derek called love. But the kind of love that makes you protect other people even when it costs you everything. The kind of love that makes you fight monsters, even when the monster used to be your own child. Derek pointed the gun at George again, but his hands were shaking now. The plan wasn't going the way he'd imagined. We weren't being cooperative victims. Last chance, Derek said. Sign the papers or I shoot him first and make you watch. That's when I saw it. In Derek's eyes. The same look he'd had as a little boy when he broke something and tried to blame Robert. The same look when he lied about eating cookies before dinner. The same look when he told the police that Robert's death was an accident. Derek was scared. The gun made him dangerous, but underneath, he was still that jealous, frightened little boy who never learned how to love anyone but himself. And scared people make mistakes. Okay? I said, holding up my hands. Okay, Derek.
I'll sign.
Just don't hurt your father. Derek smiled that cold smile again. That's better. That's much. I never let him finish the sentence. While he was gloating, while Sandra was celebrating, while they thought they'd won, I did something they never expected from a 60-year-old woman. I charged straight at Derek like a mama bear protecting her cub. The gun went off again as we collided. But this time, I felt the bullet was past my ear. Too close. Way too close. Derek fell backward, and I fell on top of him. The gun skittered across the rocky ground toward the cliff edge. George dove for it at the same time as Sandra. For a moment it looked like we might actually win. Like love and courage might be stronger than greed and murder. But Derek was younger and stronger than me. He threw me off him like I weighed nothing. I hit the ground hard, my head spinning, my ribs screaming with pain. When my vision cleared, Derek was standing over me with the gun in his hand again. George was on his knees 10 feet away, Sandra pointing another gun at his head. They'd had 2 guns. We never had a chance. Enough games, Derek said, breathing hard. Time to finish this. He and Sandra forced us to stand at the very edge of the cliff. 90 feet below, sharp rocks waited in the growing darkness. The same rocks that had killed Robert. The same rocks that were about to kill us. Any last words? Derek asked mockingly. I looked at my husband, my partner for 40 years. The man who'd loved me through everything. Who'd given me 2 beautiful sons, even though one of them had turned into a monster. I love you, George, I said. I love you too, Martha, he replied. And I'm sorry about Derek. I'm sorry we couldn't save him from himself. Derek's face twisted with rage. Save me? Save me? I don't need saving. I need you dead. That's when he and Sandra put their hands on our backs. That's when they pushed us off the cliff. That's when we fell through empty air toward the rocks below, and I thought, this is how it ends. This is how our story finishes. But I was wrong. Our story was just beginning. Time moved differently when you're falling toward your death. Every second stretched like an hour. I could see every detail, the sharp rocks growing larger below us, George's terrified face beside me, the purple sky above where our murderers watched us fall. I thought about Robert, my sweet, protective firstborn son. In his last moments, had he felt this same terror? Had he called out for Derek to save him? Had he died wondering why his little brother just stood there and watched? The wind screamed in my ears. George's hand found mine in the rushing air. Even falling to our deaths, he wanted to comfort me. After 40 years of marriage, he was still trying to protect me. I'm sorry, Martha, he shouted over the wind. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe. But he had kept me safe. For 40 beautiful years, George had been my shelter from every storm. He wasn't failing me now. Derek was failing us. Derek was failing at being human. The rocks rushed up to meet us, like hungry mouths full of stone teeth. Then everything went black. I woke up in a world of pain. My whole body felt like it had been hit by a truck. My left arm was bent in a way arms shouldn't bend. Blood ran down my face from somewhere above my hairline. When I tried to move, white-hot agony shot through my ribs. But I was alive. George, I whispered, my voice barely a croak. George, are you there? A groan answered me from somewhere close by. I turned my head slowly, fighting waves of dizziness and nausea. George was lying 3 feet away, his face covered in blood, one leg twisted underneath him. But his eyes were open. His chest was rising and falling. He was alive too. How were we alive? We'd fallen 90 feet onto solid rock. People didn't survive falls like that. People died from falls like that. Unless. I looked around and realized we hadn't landed on the rocks. We'd landed on a narrow ledge about 20 feet down from the cliff top. A ledge covered with pine branches and old snow that had cushioned our fall just enough to save our lives. Martha, George gasped, trying to sit up. Are you okay? I'm alive, I said, which was more than I'd expected 5 minutes ago. Everything hurts, but everything's still attached. He looked up toward the cliff edge high above us. They think we're dead. As if they'd heard him, Voices drifted down from the top of the cliff. Derek's voice.
Cold and businesslike.
Are you sure they're dead? I can't see them down there. Of course they're dead, Sandra replied. Nobody survives a fall like that. Look how far down it goes. I need to be sure, Derek said. We can't have any mistakes. Derek, honey, they're dead. Pancakes on the rocks. Just like Robert. My blood turned to ice. Just like Robert. She said it so casually. Like Robert's death meant nothing. Like our deaths meant nothing. You're right, Derek said after a moment. Even if by some miracle they survive the fall, they're too hurt to climb back up. They'll die of exposure before anyone finds them. So, what's our next move? Sandra asked. We go back to their house. We use the keys they brought to let ourselves in. We find the original will and destroy it. Then we wait a few days and report them missing. Worried son and daughter-in-law, you know? The police will search and eventually find the bodies. And then we inherit everything, Sandra said happily. Everything, Derek agreed. The house, the savings, the insurance money. All of it. George and I looked at each other in horror. They had planned every detail. Not just our deaths, but what came after. How to cover their tracks. How to play the grieving family members. How to get away with murder. What about the grandchildren?
Sandra asked.
Robert's kids still call Martha and George sometimes. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than winter. They're not our problem anymore. If they become a problem later, we'll handle it.
Handle it.
The same way they'd handled Robert. The same way they'd handled us. These weren't just murderers. These were monsters. Come on, Derek said. Let's get out of here before it gets completely dark. We have work to do. Their footsteps faded away into the mountain silence. George and I were alone with our pain, our fear, and the terrible knowledge of what our son had become. George, I whispered, we have to survive this. We have to make sure people know the truth about what happened to Robert, about what Derek really is. George nodded, wincing as the movement sent pain through his injured body. How, Martha? We're stuck on a ledge with broken bones and no way to call for help. Even if we survive the night, who's going to believe us? Derek's story will be that we went hiking and had an accident. He was right, and we both knew it. Derek had thought of everything. He'd committed the perfect crime. Except for one thing. I reached into my jacket pocket, praying that the fall hadn't destroyed what I'd hidden there. My fingers found the small digital recorder I'd started carrying after we noticed the missing money from our bank account. The recorder I'd turned on when Derek first started talking about Robert on the hiking trail. The recorder that had captured every word of Derek's confession. George, I said, holding up the tiny device. We have proof. George's eyes widened. Does it still work? I pressed the play button. Derek's voice came out of the speaker, small but clear. I didn't murder anyone. I just stopped trying to save him. The recorder had survived the fall. We had evidence that Derek had killed Robert. Evidence that he'd tried to kill us. Evidence of everything. But we still had to survive long enough to use it. The temperature was dropping fast as night fell. We were hurt, bleeding, and trapped on a narrow ledge with no food, no water, and no warm clothes. Derek was right about one thing. If we didn't get help soon, we would die of exposure. Martha, George said quietly, I need to tell you something. Before we might die. Don't talk like that, I said firmly. We're not going to die. Not like this. Listen to me, he insisted. I should have seen what Derek was becoming. I should have protected Robert better. I should have protected you better. I failed as a father and a husband. No, I said fiercely, despite the pain radiating through my broken body. Derek failed as a son and a brother. You didn't create the monster he became. He chose to become that monster. But the signs were there, George said, tears mixing with the blood on his face. The jealousy, the lying, the way he looked at Robert sometimes, like he was measuring him for a coffin. I saw it, but I told myself it was normal sibling rivalry. I thought back to all the little moments over the years. Derek's tantrums when Robert got attention. Derek's lies about breaking things and blaming other people. Derek's coldness whenever Robert achieved something good. The signs had been there. But what parents want to believe their child is capable of murder? We did our best, I said. We loved both our sons the best way we knew how. It's not our fault that Derek chose hate over love. A sound from above made us both freeze. Footsteps on the cliff edge. Had Derek come back? Had he decided to make sure we were really dead? Hello, a voice called. Not Derek's voice. A stranger's voice. Is someone down there? George and I looked at each other. This was our chance. Maybe our only chance. Help! I screamed with what was left of my voice. Help us. Down here. George shouted. We're hurt. A bright flashlight beam swept across the cliff face and found us on our narrow ledge. Oh my God, the voice said. Hold on. I'm calling for help. Within minutes, we could hear sirens in the distance. Rescue teams. Paramedics. People who would save our lives and help us bring Derek to justice. As we waited for rescue, I clutched the digital recorder in my hand. The proof of Derek's crimes. The voice of our dead son's murderer, confessing to everything. Robert would finally get justice. And Derek would finally pay for what he'd done to our family. But first, we had to convince the world that our own son had tried to murder us. That was going to be the hardest part of all. Because who wants to believe that a child could do such evil to the parents who loved him? The rescue team lowered ropes down to our ledge. Strong hands lifted us up into the light. Warm blankets wrapped around our broken bodies. Ambulance sirens wailed as we were rushed toward the hospital. And in my pocket, Derek's recorded confession rode along with us. The evidence that would bring down the monster who used to be our little boy. The monster who thought he'd gotten away with the perfect murder. He was wrong. The hardest part wasn't over yet. The hardest part was just beginning. Because now we had to destroy the child we'd raised in order to save everyone else he might hurt. But sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes love means accepting that the person you tried to protect has become too dangerous to protect anymore. Sometimes love means choosing justice over family. Even when it breaks your heart into pieces too small to ever put back together again. The ambulance rushed through the mountain darkness toward a future we couldn't imagine. A future where our son would be in prison and our family would be destroyed forever. But at least it would be a future where the truth finally came out. At least it would be a future where Robert could rest in peace, knowing his killer wouldn't escape justice anymore. That had to be enough. It had to be. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I woke up 3 times before I could stay awake long enough to remember where I was. Each time, the memories crashed back like ocean waves. Derek pointing a gun at us. The feeling of falling through empty air. The terrible conversation we'd overheard from our ledge. My son was a murderer. My son had tried to murder us. Some truths are too big for your mind to hold all at once. Mrs. Thompson? A gentle voice brought me back to the present. A nurse with kind eyes was checking the machines connected to my body. How are you feeling? Like I fell off a cliff, I said, then almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. Well, you did fall off a cliff, the nurse said with a small smile. You're incredibly lucky to be alive. Both you and your husband.
George.
Is he okay? Can I see him? He's in the room next door. Broken leg, 3 cracked ribs, concussion, but he's going to be fine. Just like you. She paused, her expression growing serious. There are some police officers who'd like to talk to you both, when you're ready. They said it's about what happened on the mountain. My heart started beating faster. This was it. The moment when we'd have to tell the truth about Derek. The moment when we'd have to destroy what was left of our family to save everyone else. I'm ready, I said. The nurse nodded and left the room. A few minutes later, 2 police officers walked in. One was a young man with earnest eyes. The other was an older woman who looked like she'd seen every kind of human cruelty and still got up every morning to fight it. Mrs. Thompson, the woman said, I'm Detective Rodriguez. This is Officer Blake. We understand you've been through a terrible ordeal, but we need to ask you some questions about what happened on the mountain. I took a deep breath. Officers, before you ask me anything, I need to tell you something important. My son Derek and his wife Sandra didn't just watch us fall off that cliff. They pushed us. The two officers exchanged glances. Officer Blake pulled out a notebook. That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez said carefully. Can you tell us exactly what happened?
So I did.
I told them everything. About Derek's jealousy of Robert. About the missing money from our bank account. About the forged signatures. About the pressure to change our will. About Derek's confession that he'd let Robert die. And then I showed them the digital recorder. Detective Rodriguez's eyes widened when she heard Derek's voice admitting to Robert's murder. When she heard him and Sandra planning how to cover up our deaths and steal our property. This is extraordinary evidence, she said quietly. But I have to ask, why were you recording your son? Because we knew something was wrong. I admitted. The missing money, the strange behavior, the constant pressure about the will. George and I started to suspect Derek was stealing from us. I never imagined he was capable of murder. Officer Blake stopped writing. Mrs. Thompson, are you telling us that your son Derek murdered his brother Robert 3 years ago? Yes, I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. And yesterday, he tried to murder my husband and me. Where are Derek and Sandra now? Detective Rodriguez asked. I don't know. They left after they pushed us off the cliff. They probably think we're dead. The officers looked at each other again. Detective Rodriguez stood up. Mrs. Thompson, we're going to need to copy this recording. And we're going to need to bring Derek and Sandra in for questioning immediately. What if they run? I asked. What if they disappear before you can arrest them? They won't run, Detective Rodriguez said grimly. People like your son never think they're going to get caught. They think they're too smart. They think their plan is perfect. But his plan almost was perfect, I said. If we hadn't survived the fall. But you did survive, she said. And now we have evidence. That changes everything. After the police left, George was wheeled into my room in a wheelchair. His leg was in a cast, and his face was bruised purple and yellow, but he was alive. He was here. Did you tell them? He asked. I told them everything. I played them the recording. George closed his eyes. It's really happening, isn't it? We're really going to have our son arrested for murder. I reached out and took his hand. George, he stopped being our son the moment he decided to kill Robert. What we're doing now isn't destroying our family. Derek already did that. I know, George said softly, but it still breaks my heart. Mine too. Even knowing what Derek had done, even having proof of his crimes, part of me still remembered the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. The child who used to bring me drawings he'd made at school. The teenager who used to help George fix cars in the garage. That little boy was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years, and we'd just been too blind to see it. The next few hours felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Detective Rodriguez called to tell us they'd arrested Derek at our house. He'd been going through our personal papers, looking for the original will. Sandra had been packing up our jewelry and anything else valuable she could carry. They didn't even wait a full day before they started stealing from your home, Detective Rodriguez said. And get this, Derek actually seemed surprised when we arrested him. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that his parents were dead. What did you tell him? We told him his parents were very much alive and looking forward to testifying against him. Derek's reaction, according to Detective Rodriguez, was not grief or relief that we'd survived. It was pure rage that his plan had failed. Even when faced with the evidence of the recording, Derek didn't confess. Instead, he hired an expensive lawyer and claimed the recording was fake. He said we'd fallen off the cliff by accident and were now trying to frame him because we'd always favor Robert. Sandra, on the other hand, cracked like an egg the moment they put her in handcuffs. She's telling us everything, Detective Rodriguez reported. How Derek had been planning this for months. How he'd been forging her signatures to steal money. How he'd convinced her that you two were old and sick and wouldn't live much longer anyway. She believed that? George asked. People believe what they want to believe, Mr. Thompson, especially when believing it makes them rich. Sandra also told the police about Robert's real death. How Derek had pushed his brother during an argument about the family business. How Derek had come home and practiced his story about Robert falling accidentally. How he'd even cried fake tears in the mirror to make sure he looked convincing. He made her promise to keep the secret, Detective Rodriguez said. Told her it would be their little insurance policy in case the family money didn't come to them fast enough. Insurance policy. That's what Robert's murder was to them. Not a tragedy. Not the death of a good man. Just insurance. The news media got hold of the story within days. Reporters camped outside the hospital trying to get interviews with us. The headlines were sensational and horrible. Son pushes parents off cliff for inheritance, and family murder plot exposed, and brother's killer strikes again. I hated seeing our private pain turned into entertainment for strangers. But I was glad the truth was coming out. I was glad people would know what Derek really was. The hardest part was the phone call from Robert's widow, Michelle. "Martha," she said, crying so hard she could barely speak. "I just saw the news. Is it true? Did Derek really kill Robert?" How do you tell someone that their husband's death wasn't an accident? How do you explain that the person they trusted, the person they grieved with, was actually the murderer?
"I'm so sorry, Michelle," I said.
"We didn't know. If we'd known, we would have." "You would have what?" she asked, but not in an angry way. In a heartbroken way. How could anyone have known? How could anyone have imagined? She was right. Derek had fooled everyone. The police, the coroner, the insurance company, Robert's friends, his wife, his children. Everyone except, apparently, his own guilty conscience. "The children," Michelle said suddenly. "Robert's children. They're going to have to know that their uncle killed their father."
How do I tell them that?
I didn't have an answer for that. Some truths are too terrible for children to understand. But they'd have to understand eventually, because Derek's trial would be in all the newspapers. Everyone would know. "We'll help you," I promised. "George and I will help you tell them, help them understand. We'll all get through this together." Because that's what family means. Not the people who share your blood, but the people who stand by you when the world falls apart. Derek had forgotten that. He'd thought family was about money and inheritance, and who got what when people died. He'd never understood that real family is about love and protection and sacrifice. Robert had understood. Robert died because he understood. Now Derek would spend the rest of his life in prison because he never learned what Robert knew from birth. That family means you protect each other, not destroy each other. The trial was set for 3 months away. 3 months to prepare for the hardest thing George and I would ever have to do. 3 months to prepare to testify against our own son. 3 months to prepare to send Derek to prison for the rest of his life. But first, we had to heal. We had to get strong enough to survive what was coming. Because the worst part wasn't behind us yet. The worst part would be looking Derek in the eye in that courtroom and telling the world exactly what kind of monster he'd become. The worst part would be saying goodbye forever to the little boy we'd raised and accepting that he'd grown up to be someone we didn't recognize. Someone we'd never be able to love the same way again. Someone who'd chosen darkness over light and murder over mercy. Our son, the killer. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom looking at my son Derek for the first time since he'd pushed me off a cliff. He looked different. Thinner. His eyes were cold and empty, like looking into a frozen lake. When our eyes met across the courtroom, he didn't look away. He didn't look ashamed or sorry or sad. He looked angry that we were still alive. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Patricia Williams presiding. This was it. The moment when the truth would finally come out in front of the whole world. The moment when Derek would pay for what he'd done to Robert, to us, to our family. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Miss Chun, stood up to give her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about the ultimate betrayal. A son who murdered his own brother out of jealousy. A son who tried to murder his own parents for money. A son who thought he was smart enough to get away with the perfect crime." She pointed at Derek, sitting at the defendant's table in his expensive suit. Derek Thompson killed his brother Robert 3 years ago by pushing him off a cliff during a family hiking trip. Then, when his parents started asking too many questions and getting too close to the truth, he tried to kill them too. In the exact same way. At the exact same place. The jury looked horrified. I could see some of them glancing between Derek and us, trying to understand how a child could do such evil to his own family. But Derek Thompson made one crucial mistake, Ms. Chin continued. He underestimated his parents' will to survive, and their determination to get justice for their murdered son. She held up the digital recorder. This device contains Derek's own confession. His own words admitting to Robert's murder. His own voice planning how to cover up his parents' deaths and steal their life savings. Derek's lawyer, a slick man in a $1,000 suit, tried to argue that the recording was fake. That George and I were lying because we'd always favored Robert. That Derek was just a grieving son who'd been falsely accused by bitter parents. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recording spoke for itself. Sandra's detailed confession filled in every missing piece. The forged signatures on our bank accounts. The detailed plan to kill us and inherit everything. The way Derek had practiced crying fake tears in the mirror after Robert's murder. When it was my turn to testify, I walked slowly to the witness stand. My broken rib still ached, and my arm was still healing, but I was strong enough to tell the truth. Mrs. Thompson, Ms. Chun said gently, "Can you tell the jury what happened on the mountain that day?"
So I did.
I told them about Derek's confession that he'd let Robert die. About the guns. About being forced to the edge of the cliff. About falling through the air and thinking we were going to die. "And after you fell," Miss Chin asked, "what did you hear from the top of the cliff?" "I heard my son and his wife planning how to steal our house, our money, everything we'd worked for our whole lives. I heard them talking about Robert's murder like it was just a business decision." "How did that make you feel?" I looked across the courtroom at Derek. He was staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. No love. No recognition. No humanity. It made me realize that the little boy I'd raised was gone. I said. The child who used to crawl into our bed during storms, who used to help his father fix cars, who used to bring me drawings from school, that boy was dead. Derek had killed him just as surely as he'd killed Robert. Several jury members wiped tears from their eyes. When it was George's turn to testify, he was even more heartbroken than I was. "I keep asking myself if there were signs I missed," he said, his voice shaking. "If there was something I could have done differently. Some way I could have saved both my sons." "Mr. Thompson," the prosecutor asked, "do you believe Derek can be rehabilitated? Do you think he deserves another chance?" George was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Derek. "I will always love the little boy Derek used to be," he said. "But that little boy is gone. The man sitting at that table planned and executed the murder of his own brother. Then he tried to murder his parents when we got too close to the truth. He showed no mercy to Robert when Robert was falling to his death. He showed no mercy to us when he pushed us off that same cliff." George's voice grew stronger. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about protecting other people from dangerous individuals. Derek is dangerous. He's shown that he'll kill anyone who stands between him and what he wants. Even family. Especially family." The most devastating testimony came from Sandra herself. She'd agreed to testify against Derek in exchange for a lighter sentence. Sitting on the witness stand in her orange prison uniform, she looked like a different person than the sharp, beautiful woman who used to visit our house. "Derek had been planning Robert's murder for months," she said, not looking at Derek. "He was obsessed with the idea that Robert was going to inherit everything and leave Derek with nothing." "Did Derek ever express remorse for killing his brother?" the prosecutor asked. "Remorse?" Sandra laughed bitterly. "Derek was proud of what he'd done. He said Robert was weak and stupid for trusting him. He said anyone dumb enough to turn their back on Derek deserved what they got." "What about his parents? How did Derek feel about Martha and George?" "He hated them," Sandra said simply. "He blamed them for loving Robert more. He said they were old and useless and taking too long to die naturally. He wanted their money, their house, everything, and he wanted it now." "Did you try to talk him out of killing them?" Sandra was quiet for a moment. No, she admitted. I wanted the money too. I thought. I thought if we just got rid of the old people, we could have everything we wanted. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. Derek's lawyer tried to save him. He brought in psychiatrists who said Derek had mental health issues. He claimed Derek was suffering from depression and grief over Robert's death. He said Derek needed treatment, not prison. But the jury saw through it all. When Derek himself took the stand, he made everything worse. Instead of showing remorse or asking for forgiveness, Derek tried to justify what he'd done. Robert always thought he was better than me, Derek said coldly. He acted like he was the perfect son, the golden child. He talked down to me my whole life. So, you decided to kill him? The prosecutor asked. I decided to stop letting him control my life, Derek replied. When he slipped on those rocks, I could have saved him. But why should I? Why should I save someone who never cared about me? What about your parents? Why did you try to kill Martha and George? Derek shrugged like it was obvious. They were going to figure out the truth about Robert eventually. They were already suspicious. And they were going to leave half their money to Robert's widow instead of giving everything to me. I'm their only living son. I deserved everything.
Deserved.
That word said everything about who Derek had become. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. We find the defendant, Derek Thompson, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Thompson. We find the defendant, Derek Thompson, guilty of attempted murder in the first degree of Martha Thompson and George Thompson. We find the defendant guilty of fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Derek's face didn't change as the guilty verdicts were read. He sat there like a stone statue, showing no emotion at all. Judge Williams sentenced Derek to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mr. Thompson, she said, looking down at Derek, you have committed crimes that shock the conscience. You murdered your own brother out of jealousy and greed. You attempted to murder your own parents for money. You have shown no remorse, no humanity, no capacity for rehabilitation. This court sentences you to spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will never again have the opportunity to hurt innocent people. You will never again be able to destroy families or take lives. Derek was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at us. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize. He just walked out of our lives forever. Sandra received 25 years for her part in the crimes. She would be an old woman when she got out if she lived that long. Justice had been served. But it didn't feel like victory. 6 months after the trial, George and I were sitting in our lawyer's office, signing papers to adopt Robert's children. Michelle, Robert's widow, had remarried and moved across the country. She wanted the children to have stability and love, and she knew we could give them that. Are you sure you're ready for this? Our lawyer asked. Raising children at your age after everything you've been through? I looked at 8-year-old Tommy and 6-year-old Sarah, Robert's beautiful children. They looked so much like their father. Tommy had Robert's kind eyes. Sarah had Robert's gentle smile. We're ready, I said. These children deserve to know how much their father was loved. They deserve to grow up in a family built on love, not greed. George nodded. Robert would have wanted us to take care of them. He would have wanted them to be safe and loved. We sold our old house. Too many bad memories there. Too many ghosts of the family Derek had destroyed. We bought a smaller house in a different town, with a big backyard where Tommy and Sarah could play, where they could have happy childhoods filled with love instead of fear. Some people asked us how we could bear to raise Robert's children when they looked so much like him. How we could handle the constant reminder of what we'd lost. But that's exactly why we needed to raise them. Every time Tommy laughed, I heard Robert's laugh. Every time Sarah drew me a picture, I remembered Robert bringing me drawings from school. These children weren't just Robert's legacy. They were our chance to do right by the love Robert had given us. Derek was gone from our lives forever. But Robert's love lived on in his children. And that love was stronger than Derek's hatred. That love was stronger than murder and greed and betrayal. That love was what family was really about. On quiet evenings, when Tommy and Sarah were asleep and George and I sat on our new front porch, we sometimes talked about Derek. We wondered if there was something we could have done differently. Some way we could have saved him from becoming a monster. But mostly, we focused on the future. We focused on giving Tommy and Sarah the kind of childhood Robert would have wanted them to have. Full of love and laughter and safety. Full of people who would protect them instead of hurt them. We couldn't bring Robert back. We couldn't undo Derek's crimes. But we could make sure that Robert's children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally. We could make sure that good triumphed over evil, even when evil wore the face of our own son. And on the hardest days, when the pain of losing both our sons felt too heavy to bear, we reminded ourselves of something important. Love is stronger than hate. Truth is stronger than lies. Justice is stronger than greed. And family, real family, is about the people who stand by you when the world falls apart, not the people who push you off cliffs when they want your money. Derek made his choice 3 years ago when he decided to let Robert die. We made our choice when we decided to fight for the truth. Now Tommy and Sarah have their whole lives ahead of them, full of people who will love them and protect them and teach them the difference between right and wrong. That's Robert's real legacy. That's how love wins in the end. The end. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and share it with others who need to hear this message. Subscribe to hear more true stories about the power of love over evil, truth over lies, and justice over greed. Because sometimes the most important stories are the hardest ones to tell, and the most necessary ones to hear. Remember, real family protects each other. Real love sacrifices for others. And real justice never gives up, no matter how powerful the people who try to silence the truth. Thank you for listening to Martha and George's story. May we all have the courage to stand up for truth, even when it costs us everything.